Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu.
Shalom, Reb Brian Yosef here. In this episode, we're going to learn about 3 steps for not getting taken over by anger and instead acting effectively from our inner capacity for wisdom. Enjoy. There's an interesting contradiction we can notice, which is that in spirituality in general, we understand that the purpose of spirituality is to help us to transcend reactivity. Anger is a form of reactivity, and actually everything I'm going to say applies to all reactivity, not just anger, but I'm focusing on that as an example. By reactivity, I realize some people might not know exactly what I mean by that term, because the word itself doesn't explain itself. So let's make sure we know what we're talking about. Reactivity doesn't mean like if I'm in the car and a car comes and I react quickly by, getting out of the way and saving everybody. That's not what I mean by reactivity. That's a good thing. That's important. And that's what I don't have that much of right now, which is why I'm not driving in my post-concussion state. My reactiveness, maybe I'll use that word, is a little dampened. But reactivity means the arising of negative emotion that gets triggered usually by external circumstances, but it can also get triggered by our own thoughts, usually about external circumstances, but not always. Okay, so there's a relationship between the mind, that is the thinking mind, and emotions. And emotions are like, they can be like fire. In other words, just like a fire can be destructive, and it can move very quickly and blaze things up. So in the same kind of way, we can lose control over any sense of what we're trying to do and who we want to be because the reactivity takes over. So that's what I'm talking about when I say reactivity. I'm talking about a negative thing, but also a very natural thing. It's something that we all experience as a natural result of what happens to us, and it does have some positive purpose to it. So, for example, the reactivity of fear can save our lives sometimes, right? It's there for a purpose, but it can often be a hindrance in our lives. The contradiction I was talking about is that sometimes in the scriptures, it's pointed out that Hashem, that God, the divine, is depicted as an angry God. People who are very critical or don't like religion, or Jewish-based religion anyway, or Judeo-Christian religion, will often point out God seems so angry all the time. He's like angry, he's jealous, he's a he, it's a turnoff, right? I'm not going to get into a lot of textual analysis. There are lots of examples like that in the Torah. There are also the opposite. There are lots of examples of the divine as compassionate and loving and transcendent and so on. But what I want to focus on in terms of how does this become useful to us? Okay, and I don't want to get into a debate about the tradition or scriptures or anything like that, but I want to point out something which is an amazing hint for us to be aware of. This comes from Psalm number 7. It's the 7th Psalm, and it's actually the 7th verse of the 7th Psalm. The author, who traditionally is seen as King David, is running away from his enemies, and his life is threatened and so on. And so he says in verse 7, Kuma Adonai be'apecha. Kuma means rise up, Hashem, be'apecha, in your anger. Now that word, apecha, comes from af, which is a word for anger, but af also means nose. So it's a funny idiom because it has to do with the idea that when we get angry, we flare our nose. I don't know if I can do it so well, but anyway. So the nose is associated with anger because it tends to flare up. So it says, rise up, Hashem, in your anger. Hinaseh be'avrot sodorai. Lift yourself in fury against my tormentors. So we seem to have this vision of that, again, that can be kind of a turnoff of the divine as some kind of angry being. But then we look at the next verse. And here's what to me, I think, really clarifies it and contextualizes what it means by anger. It says, Va'adat le'umim tesovavecha, when the nations or the peoples surround you, apparently in a threatening kind of way, when the nations are against you, when everyone's against you, okay? What does it say? It says, aleha. That is from the root which means to transcend, to rise above. Aleha means rise above it. Rise above it. Lamarom shuva. Lamarom means the great heights. Shuva means return. Return to the heights. Rise above it. So what do you mean, on one hand, be angry and get vengeance, but on the other hand, rise above it? So there's a teaching of Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, the Hasidic teacher, who warned that you should be very careful not to get angry at people in your own house. Now, of course, we can get angry for all kinds of reasons, but sometimes people in our own house can make us the most angry, especially if we're still dealing, in the parent realm. Anyway, maybe some of you have that memory. We can get angry at people in our own house. And so he's warning you, he's saying, be careful, because when you do that, when you allow yourself to become angry at people, then you pollute yourself with that anger, okay? You degrade yourself. But you also pollute the people that are around you. You transmit, it's like a virus, a non-physical virus that you're transmitting. But then he also says, I keep my anger in my pocket, and when I need it, I can take it out and use it. And so, bringing that back to our verse, the question is, regardless of whether the anger is justified, whether it's really just your own issue, or whether something really is destructive in the world or in your home or whatever is really happening, put that aside for the moment and let's focus instead not on what's going on out there. Let's focus on what's going on in here, and then focus on what more is there besides that anger. Because when the anger comes, the tendency is to become the anger, and then that's it. That's it. We're just filled with anger, and that's all that's there. And so the key is to not deny the anger or try to push it away or suppress it. That's going to hurt us. But to expand beyond it. Aleha lamarom shuva. Rise above it. Return to that which is behind the anger, which is, of course, the space of consciousness. That's what it means to be conscious. Be conscious of the anger, and from there, we can either accomplish or come closer to accomplishing a true sense of what's appropriate to do in the moment, what's appropriate to say, how do we respond? Not react, not merely react, but respond in a way that comes from wisdom. So, the foundation of the whole thing, of course, is meditation. Because if we understand transcending anger, we can understand that intellectually, but in the moment of the anger, that doesn't necessarily help us. It can help us a little bit, because whether we meditate or not, we are more than the anger. But still, it's very helpful to practice being more than not just anger, but any content of your experience whatsoever. You're more than your thoughts. You're more than your sensations. You're more than your emotions. You're more than your stories. And by stories, I mean all stories. Your whole personal history, your whole context of your life. You're more than all of that. That's not to degrade any of that. It's just to say there's more to you than that. Why is there more to you than that? Because all those things arise in and are only relevant because of consciousness, because you're conscious. And that consciousness is the more. Again, ordinarily, Most people don't know that because most people are simply focused on what's going on in their experience, what's going on in their thoughts, what's going on in their bodies. That's where the focus is. And the context of the whole thing, which is consciousness, is just blah. It's just taken for granted. There's no attention to attention. There's no attention to attention. That's what meditation is all about. It's all about learning how to be the attention, how to be the consciousness. And I don't know if you can really do that without actually spending some time doing it. Meaning sitting down. You don't have to sit down. You can lie down. You can stand up even. But for most people, sitting down helps. But again, it's not the physical position that's so important. The important thing is that your body is not engaged in the process of doing. You're not trying to create an effect in time. You're not doing something to create some other effect later, other than the meditation itself, which is certainly going to help you later. But the act of doing it is being conscious of what is present. That is being conscious of your emotions, being conscious of whatever your sensations are, being conscious of the thoughts that are arising, and letting them all be as they are without engaging with them. And that's hard. Meditation is not easy. It's not just relaxing, because the thoughts tend to capture us moment by moment. The thoughts have a gravity to them. They're like, they arise, and the next moment you're thinking the thoughts. So the act of meditation is to continuously aleha, rise above it. Continue, and you don't do that by suppressing it. You do that by just noticing, oh, there's a thought. No big deal. I'm just going to return to my tefillah, atahu, atiahi. I'm going to return to the tefillah. I'm going to let that thought come. I'm going to let that thought go. And the point of all this is not the thoughts or anything in your experience. The point of it is la marom shuva, returning to your essence, which is consciousness. It's not so esoteric or spiritual. Of course, it is spiritual, but sometimes when we say the word spiritual, we think it's something outside of our experience that we have to attain. It's actually what is hearing these words right now. It's the most present. It's the closest thing. As the Torah says, it's not over the sea. It's not up in the heavens. Beficha ulavavcha lasoto. It's in your mouth and in your heart to do it. Meaning it's right here to do it. How do you do it? You be present with what is right now. That's how we do it. So there are these 3 little steps that we can keep in mind. If you get the first step, then you almost don't have to discuss the second 2 steps because they become more or less obvious. But it's helpful to have 3 steps because we like the number 3. What's the first step? The first step is acknowledging, and you can do this verbally. It's very helpful to do this verbally, is to acknowledge what you're feeling in the moment. Because when you acknowledge it, as opposed to just go on with life from it, meaning you're acting from it, you're in an emotional state of anger, let's say, and so you just go on living life from that emotion of anger. It's very, very different to stop what you're doing and just say, I'm feeling tremendous anger right now. I'm feeling tremendous anger. Now, just saying that doesn't make the anger go away, but it shifts your perspective and accesses more. It accesses who you are on the deepest level. You may not have any immediate inspiration about anything, but it sets the stage to allow that inspiration, to allow that creativity to come through. So this is so important to do in the midst of life, to the degree that we're able to just really admit, to confess in a sense. You're not confessing to somebody. You're just acknowledging, here is the presence of this reactivity, the anger or whatever it is. Because in doing that, all of a sudden you have a bit of disidentification from it. You have a bit of space from it because there's you and there's the feeling. Whereas before you acknowledge it, then the feeling has kind of has the potential anyway for many of us to just take over, and we do whatever we do from the motive of the anger. That anger is infecting everything, right? As Reb Pinchas said, you pollute yourself and you pollute everyone around you too. So how do you turn it around? The beginning of it is just acknowledging that pollution is there. There is anger here. There is anger here. There's tremendous anger here. Okay. But now there's not just the anger. Now there's the consciousness of the anger. And that's the turning point. That's the transformational thing upon which everything is rests. Everything rests on that. Okay, so now step number 2, once there's that acknowledgement, then before you move into action, you can use your mind, your thinking mind, what we call bina, the thinking mind, the discerning, contemplating mind. You can ask yourself the question, what does anger want me to do right now? What does anger want me to do right now? And you can ask, what does wisdom want me to do right now? So it's a little trick. You're objectifying. We're talking about anger as if it's something separate. And in a sense it is, because it's a temporary form of consciousness, and consciousness can separate itself from it in the sense of objectivity on it. And then this quality of wisdom, which we call chokhmah. Chokhmah is wisdom. It means, is there a creative insight that can come through for how to behave in a way that's going to bring about the kind of results that we want, that's going to bring about that which is desirable. Now, you may not get any answers to what wisdom wants, but you should be able to get an answer to what anger wants. And if you can tell that what you're motivated to do, what you feel like doing, is actually coming from anger, again, that's a tremendous victory right there. Because maybe the most wisdom can tell you is just don't do that. That's a lot right there. You get better at it with practice, then wisdom might tell you something beyond that. It might give you some insight as to, that's what separates the spiritual masters from the rest of us, is that they can do something or say something that's not, it has the desired effect that they want. It's not just the thought of the effect. It actually has that effect. That's the potential of the chokhmah within us. But we use bina. So chokhmah and bina are working together. That is wisdom and thinking mind, contemplation, using the thinking mind in a directed way to lead us in the right direction. What does wisdom want? What does anger want? And then the third step is listening to wisdom and doing that. Again, it might just mean not doing the angry thing. But sometimes it does mean doing the angry thing. That's the interesting thing, is that, as Reb Pinchas said, I keep anger in my pocket and I take it out when necessary. So there might be times when it's necessary to act stern and to act firm, but only if it's coming from wisdom. Only if wisdom says, take on the clothing of anger. And you can only really do that if you're not controlled by your anger. You have to do it deliberately, consciously. You can't do it just because you were taken over by anger. How do we do that? Again, lamarom shuva. We have to rise above the anger first. And we do that by acknowledging that the anger is there, not suppressing it, causing ourselves problems later by suppressing our emotions. The opposite, acknowledging it, feeling it, recognizing that it's there, and then recognizing that which recognizes it. There's this consciousness within which the anger is happening, and that consciousness has the quality of chokhmah. It also has the quality of aleph, as we talked about the other week. Aleph is the ability to, and the practice of deliberately feeling whatever's there, whatever emotions are present. That's what aleph is all about. And aleph and chokhmah, and really all the paths, are just different qualities of the same thing. They're all qualities of consciousness. So we access that deeper consciousness, And from that space, the wisdom comes through. And how do we do that? We do that by deliberately spending time together or alone, but spending time in silent recognition of what is in our experience and knowing ourselves as that consciousness. I hope you enjoyed this episode on the 3 steps for overcoming anger and acting from wisdom. If you're on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and leave a comment if you're able. If you're on the podcast, be sure to follow. And remember, if you want to go deeper, no better way than to join our meditation sessions live on Zoom, which you can do by becoming a member of Torah of Awakening. You'll also be able to participate in live Q&A and get one-on-one guidance. Just go to torahofawakening.com and you can try it free. All blessings.